Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. Hope you all had a wonderful time during the holidays. I know some of you were very busy. Some of you, I hope, were enjoying time with friends and family, a little downtime, but I hope everybody did have a good New Year and a good holiday. Oh, let me put this up there on the screen now that we have people and it's not just my big head. There we go. Let's put it up. All right. Oops. Let's make this large. So, has anybody heard the news? We're like, what news, Carrie? I'm going to tell you that.
Give me a lawsuit.
No, please, dear Lord. The lawsuit, well, we all know it passed, right? I can tell you that. And the day it passed, they filed an appeal. Super fun. What does that mean? It just means, guys, this is the new norm. The DOJ obviously has reopened it. They're looking into, more fun stuff as normal. Good morning, Chad. I'm not telling you anything because what's the point? We have nothing new to say. I'm going to say do business as usual. We already know the right things to do. We are doing the right things. I can tell you by looking at all the stuff I'm constantly looking at. You guys are making more money. That's a good thing because now you're getting paid for the professional services that you are worth. Because when you work with a buyer, you tell the buyer all the wonderful things you're going to be doing and you tell them your professional fee. That is a huge game changer for us. And when you're working with the seller, the great news is you're separating those fees, which is terrific. So then maybe they feel a little bit better about saying what your fee is, and they can offer the buyer whatever because that's negotiable, isn't it? So I see on our side, this has been a nice change on the upside, if you follow me. So we're just going to keep doing business as usual, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I will say though, briefly, hello. The one thing that will continue to be ever changing are documents and forms. I can definitely say one thing I will notice is that there still will be confusion by other agents out there not knowing what forms to use. Just as a quick reminder before we jump into all the changes, well, actually, I won't do it. We're going to jump into the changes. We'll do it there. But as a quick reminder, agents still don't know which compensation forms to use. You guys do, and if you have any questions, contact me. But that is going to be a continuing thing, right? There's still going to be confusion on that, and that's okay. This is like our new norm, right, guys? So, but in terms of the lawsuit, yes, it was approved. Yes, it's appealed. But does that mean anything? No, it really doesn't. So it's just, it is what it is. We're doing business as we plan to and as we were supposed to. Okay. But I will tell you the funny thing is that the DOJ, you know what they don't like? They don't like the buyers signing the buyer broker representation immediately. That's the most ridiculous thing. They're saying that the buyers should get to try it out, work with us for a while before they make a decision. Oh, I see. So we work for free for a while and then they, go do a contract with their mother, their brother, their sister or something, right? Yeah, no, I'm not feeling good about that. So we're professionals and we can do whatever we want because we're independent contractors. So I don't know any professional who would go and work with a seller and do all that work and not have a listing agreement. Do you? No, right? So why would you do that with a buyer? I wouldn't. So we don't have to. We never had to. You could have always used a buyer broker agreement. So it's the same thing. So if anything ever did change, I don't think they could ever unilaterally say you can't, right? But right now, unilaterally, they're saying you have to. You have to have a buyer broker agreement day one. So what could the change possibly be? They're saying maybe they could say you don't need to have it day one. Maybe that comes up. But that doesn't mean you can't require it, right? It doesn't mean that it can't be your norm. And I would suggest it should always be your norm because why should you ever work with somebody so that they could go work with somebody else? But anyway, that's me on my soapbox. But as of the way it stands, it is the way it was at the end of the year. It was the way it was. It's September 17th when everything changed for us trying to comply with the lawsuit prior to the approval of the lawsuit. So that is the way it is. You need a buyer broker agreement the day you start working with the customer. If they are putting an offer in on your listing, they come to see your listing. In terms of an open house, you don't need one, but they're putting in an offer, you need one, right? So we're all clear on that. Everybody good? Okay. Let's dive into what's new, shall we? Okay. So as you all know, we have had starting, that was special. Let me make this bigger. Can I make it bigger? Bigger? Oh, here we go. Starting in 2020, two, it started actually with the falling down of the building in South Florida. There were rules that came into fact. It was chapter 553 right here, and it's Senate Bill 4D. And it says very clearly right here, a condominium association under chapter 718 and a cooperative association, which we really don't have any co-ops here, must have a milestone inspection performed for each building that is 3 stories or more. There's a lot of confusion on that. It is 3 stories or more. So some people think it is more than 3. No, if it is 3 stories. So that is a lot of our buildings here, guys. It does apply to a lot of our buildings. So 3 stories or more in height by December 31st. So now it's all buildings. So forget about these dates because this already passed. Okay. And every year that the building reaches 30 years of age. Now, unless it's 3 miles to the coastline, then it's 25 years. So obviously in our little market, we're not so affected. So in Orlando, it's 30 years. The building is 30 years or older, right? 3 stories or higher, 30 years or older. If you're 3 miles to the coastline, you're 3 stories or higher, it's 25 years. Those are the lines, okay? And then you get a phase 1. Now, if the phase 1 comes back and there's some significant, substantial damages shown or structural problems, then deterioration is what they say, then they need to do a phase 2. That's what happens, okay? But once it's passed, then every 10 years, it must undergo another one. That is the rule, okay? So now, if anybody wants a copy of this, you can certainly do this. This is the whole laydown of everything that happens. In addition to that, they must also have a structural integrity reserve study completed every 10 years. And that is to ensure that they have enough money to cover the fixing of these structural issues that they may be having, right? Does that make sense? Because when these buildings start to deteriorate, it's very expensive to fix. And, let's all think about what happens on a lot of these associations. They're run by who? The homeowners oftentimes, right? And think about it, 30 years of ownership. These people are like, we got plenty of money, right? Let's cut down our reserve a little. Let's give ourselves a little bit of a break. So they start cutting back on the reserves. And so when they find out that they have these structural deterioration and it's going to cost a fortune to fix it, now what do they need to do? Assess. And this is where there has been some new laws changed. Guess what? New year, new condo rules. Woohoo! So this is the change as of January 1st of this year. So we're already at day what, 5? Day 6. So I hope nobody's written any condo deals in the last 5 days. Anybody do that? With a building that's 3 years or tall, 3 stories or taller and 30 years old, or 3 miles to the coastline at 25 miles in 25 years? Okay. This is what's changed. Now, because this whole situation has gotten a little bit murky, they have changed the condo rider A and also the CRISP form, which we don't use CRISP, so I'm not looking at the CRISP. But this is the part that they're really changing. So the contracts of sale for the condominium requires the statements to be included in the in very clear type regarding the milestone inspection and the turnover inspection report and the structural integrity reserve study. These 3 scenarios require these statements. If the association is required to complete the milestone, remember, maybe the association is not. Maybe it's only 2 stories. Maybe it's not 30 years old yet, right? So there are certain parameters that they may not be required yet. What if the building is 3 stories, but it's 29 years old, right? It hasn't been required yet. And your buyer's about to buy that. Don't you think they need to understand that that building may still have some huge issues, but they have not had to undergo that milestone integrity report yet? So this is really critical because they could be buying into a building that's going to have huge assessments. This is why this has become critical. You get me? So is the association required to complete the turnover and the SIRS, which is the Structural Integrity Reserve, on or after July 2023? The association has not completed them. This is the key because maybe they needed to do it, but they haven't completed them yet. That's another thing. What if they had to do it, but it hasn't been completed yet? Maybe it's in process. That's another big issue. Okay. And then if the association is not required to complete it, maybe it's not within those parameters yet. Like we said, it's 29 years old, or maybe it's only 2 stories. Or if the association is required to complete it on or after July 23rd, and they have completed them. So it has to state those things in clear language. But here's the thing, guys. If you're representing the buyer, you got to explain what all that means, right? Because it sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo to most people. They have to understand how important those reports and studies are. Not just the report of the structural integrity, but the report of the reserves are almost more important, right? Because if they don't have the money to fix whatever comes off that report, you're buying into a money pit, right? And who do you think they're going to come after when they buy in and next year they get this huge bill of a massive assessment? You're going to get a call. So I'm just going to tell you, it's very important that you understand and explain what these reports are and how important they are. And if it's year 29 on a 29-year-old building with 5 stories, you better explain to that buyer what's going to happen next year. And God help you if they're buying cash and they're not getting an inspection done. You better really make them. I would get an attorney to fill out a hold harmless. I would just CYA yourself everywhere on that sucker because, listen, let's be honest. They're going to look at everybody to blame when next year they get slapped with a huge assessment. Even though you can explain it to them all day long, you better get it in writing. Everybody clear? CYA. So we have updated forms, which we're going to go over today, but this is what's important that you understand. See, the law also states that the contract for sale and purchase of the condo does not meet these requirements. It's voidable at the option of the buyer prior to closing. So if you by chance use an old contract, you didn't realize, you use an old condo rider, or you're on the sell side and the buy side used the old one. They could get out on the closing day and there's nothing you can do about it. They get their money back because you weren't diligent enough to make sure they were using the correct forms. These forms,
Carrie,
yes.
can we have some clarification? Because you know how there's a lot of confusion about condo versus HOA when it comes to the management of the association bylaws and such versus condo versus HOA. It's a building that might have 5 stories, but they chose to manage as an HOA, which is rare, but happens in Florida.
Well,
It's the
first of all,
structure of it.
you'll know it on the estoppel, number one,
Right.
right? The estoppel will tell you. And number 2, you're going to have to do the condo rider A, which is this form right here. And
But this form deals with the building type itself, not the management type, not the
yeah, but if you're
registration
doing
type.
a condominium and you don't do the condo rider, you are not going to have all the proper language that you need.
Right,
And that's my point. So
right.
you better know, and it's going to tell you when you look at under property appraisers reports, it's going to tell you how the building is filed, if it's being filed as a homeowners association or as a condominium association. There are very few townhomes that are registered as condos, but most townhomes are 2-story, so they wouldn't actually be relevant anyway. It's very rare you're going to have 3 stories or higher registered as a residential property, not a condominium. That's going to be very rare, but it could happen. But the point
Mhm.
is, and your point is valid, Juliana, you have to be diligent in making sure if you have a condo, you have to use condo rider A. If you don't use condo rider A, they can cancel. If you're on the buy side or the sell side, this is going to be a voidable contract because this is the contract that is dealing with all of the new language right here. This addenda, which was always a requirement to a condominium, is the one that deals with all the proper language. Because your as is or your residential contract does not have that language that is necessary because it's a regular residential contract. You need to have the proper forms that go along with it. The condo rider A is where they have made all these changes. And that's what we're going to look at right now. So this
Hey,
is the one
Carrie,
for the far bar. There is another one for the crisp, which we're not going to use. Yes, who has a question?
yeah, just to make sure I'm clear on this. So we are talking about the ownership of it. If it's owned as a condo. So for instance,
Right.
to her point, Vista K,
Right.
three-story townhomes, ownership is condo. That would be what we're talking
Required.
about, correct?
You're exactly right.
Okay.
Vista
All
K
right.
is a
So
perfect
just look for
example.
ownership.
That's a
Okay.
perfect example because it is 3-story. I don't think it's 30 years old yet, though. It's probably what about
No, it's not. But
yeah,
its ownership is
yeah,
condo. So,
condominium, right. So they did this to themselves, but yeah.
but
Yes,
it's a master association townhome. So, but
right,
it doesn't matter because it's a master association, but it's condo ownership.
right. Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Now, for example,
Okay.
great point too. Let's say you're in Baldwin Park and you bought a centerline condo. Now, centerline is only 2-story, but let's pretend there was a 3-story one in there, which there's not because, well, actually, that's not true. We do have 3-story condos in there. I lied.
Lots of news stories in Baldwin Park. That's where I live.
Yeah, no, Centerline, we built the condos. We're the condo builder. You're thinking about Ray Townhomes, but I think we did do 3-story. I'm trying to remember, but I think most of ours, they might have been 3 stories. So let's say they're 3 stories. So we were the only condo builder in there, Centerline Homes. And our condos are a condominium, but we're also part of the homeowners association. That's where people can get confused because you have
Yeah.
two types of associations. So in that contract, you need to do all the condominium. So you do, let's say you're going to be on the buy side, you do a residential or an as is contract. Then you need to have the condominium rider. Then you need to have the seller's disclosure for condominium, not the seller's disclosure. You need a seller's disclosure for condominium, a totally different disclosure. And then you'll need a homeowners association disclosure as well. You need the HOA disclosure because there's a
For the
master
master.
association that
Yeah.
you belong to. So that's
Yeah.
where I think people get confused because you're part of a homeowners association and you're a condominium. But that actual ownership is a condo. Those buildings are condominium. Is
Yeah.
everybody clear on that? But and
We've
those
got them
are
in Lake Nona too.
they're not that old there yet. We probably built them in 2007. They're getting there though. They're not 30 years yet, but they would be applicable to that. Now I can tell you they're very well built, all concrete, huge footers. You're going to be good there. But still, same point. Emma, yes, your question.
Okay, sorry, I had jumped on a little bit later, but I just want to make sure. So if I'm on the buyer's side and I'm not using the as is, I'm using a condominium rider, and I would know that because it says the property style is condominium.
No, you're going to use a contract if you're on the buy side. So
Okay.
it could be an as is or a residential. But to go with your contract, you need a condominium rider.
Okay.
And you'll need obviously a seller's disclosure, but the seller's disclosure is going to be the seller's disclosure for condominium. Let me show you.
Right.
Because if you go to our dot loop,
And they should already have that included in their like
yeah,
attachments.
they should, but let's be real. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Say let's talk about the wonderful,
I wouldn't trust it.
well, let's just say that we have a situation where some people are lacking and, I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. Okay. So if
They're
you
still
go
in a learning phase.
into, yes, we are. Condominium listing folder and a condominium sale folder. Both of them will have it. But if you go into the listing folder, who put a crisp addenda in here? Jesus, Lord above. Oh my God. I got to get that out of there. What idiot put that in there? Oh my, please do not look at that. They put the wrong freaking addenda. Oh my God. I got to get that out of there right away. Oh my God. Buyer listing event. What is this? Residential data entry form. Who messes around in my files? Jesus, Lord above. Okay, here's your listing agreement. All right, seller's disclosure for condominium. Notice this is a different disclosure than a residential disclosure because remember, let's talk about a condominium for a second. In a condominium, you only own sheetrock in. Sheetrock out is owned by the association, which you own through your membership in the association. That's the plumbing, the electric, the land below you, the roof. All of that is owned by the association, which you're a member of, which is why your umbrella policy for the insurance is so high. Okay, that is the point. So that's why people who own a condominium only need renter's insurance, because it's only include, insuring your belongings and your appliances. That's all you're insuring. You don't have to insure anything else, right? That's the difference. So this is all the stuff. The roof is a common element maintained by the association. You have to ask all these questions. Termites, wood destroying organisms, water intrusion, a lot of this stuff you have to ask through the association. It's all about the association. They don't have that on a regular seller's disclosure because you own the entire home. You follow me? Even in a townhome, you own the entire home. Sometimes you have the shared element of the roof. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes in a townhome, you own your portion of the roof as well. It depends on the ownership of the townhome. But you own the land below you. You own the land in front of you all the way to the sidewalk. You own that. You do not own that in the condominium. You only own sheetrock in. You own the rest of that in a shared ownership through the association, which is why the association only talks to the owners of the association, not the person who's trying to represent the buyer, right? Because you don't own anything. You're not party to that. And not that we have co-ops. I don't know if we have any co-ops here, but a co-op, you don't even own sheetrock in. You're an owner in the cooperative. So meaning you don't even own your unit. You actually just own shares in the cooperative. So literally, could you switch units? You probably could. I've never seen that happen, but it's big in New York City. So that's even another thing. So they do talk about cooperatives in here. Maybe they have them in South Florida, but that's just something so you know, it's a little bit different as well. Yes, Mark, you raised your hand.
For 3-story townhomes, everything that's been discussed, it would apply to them as well, or would it depend on if there's a master association?
No, everything, whether you have a master association or you don't, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff we're talking about applies. The master association just means you have one other document you have to include in your contract, right? It's because you're also a part of a homeowners association. Means you have more fees, guys. Maybe you have another capital contribution, right? But the homeowners association for a condominium is a condominium association. And that means you're going to need all of these documents. So you first have to look at the ownership of the unit. The ownership of the unit that we're discussing today is condominium ownership. Does that make sense? So a condominium, you need to use the seller's disclosure for condominium. Whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, you have to make sure you have this document. You have to use the condominium rider. This is a requirement. And it tells you, like, does the association have first right of approval? That means that the association can say whether the buyer can buy or not. It's not very common in here in Central Florida. It's very common in New York, but it's not very common in here. But they could say they want to look at all your financials. They could say they want to know how you're going to use your property. Huh, trust me. What, you teach voice, you sing opera. How often you're going to practice? What is your practice schedule? Are you freaking kidding me? It's so invasive. It's horrible. Not that I've been through that. Yes. Awful.
Okay.
So
So
yes,
if the ownership says
Mhm.
townhome, then we don't have to worry about it.
Correct. This is only
Okay.
for condominium. Now, this is all the same stuff. The association, do they have first right of refusal or no? Do the members of the association have first right of refusal or no? That's insane. Then it talks about fees. This, guys, you have to understand fees and prorations. This is, do you pay for one association? Do you pay also for recreation? Okay, like in the villages, they have something that they pay for recreation. They don't even call that. They call it the bond, which is really what we call the CDD. And then they have a recreational fee. So sometimes associations, you may pay your monthly fee or quarterly, and then maybe you pay to another association because you have a master one, and then maybe you pay also a recreational fee. See, this is for what you pay monthly, right? This has nothing to do with capital contribution. That's a one-time fee that oftentimes, if you're in a double association like Baldwin Park or Avalon Park or Laureate Park, you may have to pay a capital contribution when you're selling or buying. You may have to pay a capital contribution to each of those associations. You need to know that. And if you get that wrong, you're opening up an opportunity for the buyer to cancel, just so you know. We've had that happen twice at the end of the year. We were both on the buy side, but the HOA document, it wasn't condo, came back wrong, really wrong. And what that does is it opens up an opportunity for the buyer to cancel. So you got to know. You can't just be like, oh, well, we didn't have an opportunity to know that. The seller should know what the heck they're paying. And so you got to understand that. Okay, these are where the special assessments are and prorations, okay? If they're being levied, who's going to pay for them? By the way, if the seller does this wrong, the seller has to pay for the whole thing. It says it right here. Yep. See, if seller is checked also, they got to read these. These are very interesting. Then it talks about the sprinkler system. Non-developer of the buyer hereby acknowledges that they've been provided. This is very important here. This is right here. If you check this, and oftentimes if you're representing a buyer and these have been uploaded for you, this is already pre-checked. So be very careful because this says the buyer acknowledges that they've been provided a current copy of the Declaration of Condominium, Articles of Incorporation of the Association, Bylaws of Rules of the Association, a copy of the most recent annual financial statement and budget, and frequently asked questions and answers document. More than 3 days. And then that's what opens up the 3-day right of rescission. So they now have 3 days to look at this from the day that they've received this. So if you've gotten this and this was checked, that's their 3-day right of rescission opening. Now, what happens if you didn't get all those documents? Try to fight that. We had that situation. It's very sticky. Now you got to prove you didn't get it. Now it's like he said, she said, it gets really, really messy. So you have to use diligent care and effort. When you get this document, if you're on the buy side, if you see that checked, make sure you have all the documents. If you don't, cross that out and do not allow for that. Check the D because it says this agreement is voidable by the buyer by delivering written notice of the buyer's intention to cancel within 3 days. See, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. Remember, everything is calendar days in our contract, right? After they've gotten execution of all those documents. So this means you're holding off their 3-day right of rescission. You're holding it off until they receive all those documents. So if it's me representing a buyer, I always want this D, unless I know I have like, how do you know that that's the most recent financial? Did you really get the most recent financial budget? I bet you didn't. I bet you did not. Now, they've also required that condominiums of a certain size, I think it's over 100 units, and associations over 100 units, I believe, now have to have a website where these things should live. But what if it's a smaller one? Right? So they may not be there. So sellers tell you, I don't know, I don't have it. They're lying. They have access to it, unless it's a smaller one, but then they still have to get it to you. And the listing agent does not have the right to say, oh, it's on the buyer's agent. It cannot be on the buyer's agent because we don't have the right. And, to wait for the estoppel, it's too late, right? But if they want to play that game, select the D. Fine, we can wait for the estoppel, but then your buyer can cancel at any time until after they receive that. So just know that they can cancel all the way up to closing. Yeah.
And then I had another question, Carrie.
Yeah.
In regards to the condominium ownership, like we were saying before, they might have listed it incorrectly. How can we verify whether or not it is actually condominium ownership other than relying on what's
Property
on the MO?
appraiser. Go to property appraiser.
Okay.
Yeah. Alejandro.
If you're representing the seller, because sometimes you make the seller just fill out certain aspects on the addendum.
On the condo writer?
Yeah, on the condo writer itself, do you make them fill out one of these options or do you leave it blank and not just for the buyer to fill out?
Well, it depends. Alejandro asked, if you're representing the seller, do you leave these blank or do you let the seller fill it in, or what do you do? And I'd say it depends, like the legal hotline, because do you have all these documents uploaded and are you giving them to the buyer? Because here's another thing. You don't want to get sued for non-disclosure either. Right? This is a sticky thing. Like if you're saying you've given all these things and you haven't, now you're the one who can be held responsible for that too. So it just gets ugly. Make sure you have all those things before you have them check it. Okay, here's some of the things that have changed. Now here again, just understand the buyer's request for documents. Seller shall. See, now buyer. Seller shall, at seller's expense, provide buyer with current copies of condominium documents specified in the paragraph above, as well as governance form described in section 718. We'll go down. Buyer will check either they request it or they do not request it. See, you have to know which one you're checking, because if you don't have it, you have to request it. So oftentimes they've already said do not request, and they've already checked C up here. You got to be really careful when you're looking at this if you're representing the buyer. And then it says if left blank, then requests a current copy of the documents specified above, along with the governance form. If the contract does not close, buyer shall immediately return the documents to the seller or reimburse the seller for the cost of the documents, if any. Okay, you see that? They've made it much clearer, putting the onus on the seller. Not that the buyer is entitled, but the seller has to do it. And that's the way it should be. Okay, then buyer has received the documents. Oftentimes, I've seen this, they check this and they fill in the date of the contract. That's another tricky one. So what happens is they've checked this, they read the day of the contract, they does not request, and they check C. They are taking away every option for your buyer to cancel, and they're making it seem as if your buyer's received all the documents, even if they haven't. And if you didn't catch that, it's very hard to get your buyer out of that. You got to know it's there. You've got to read these things. Okay. Then it goes on, the common elements we understand with about the garage, right? Inspections and repairs, right? The rights and obligations under paragraph 11 and 12 of the contract to maintain, repair, or replace is limited to the seller's individual condominium unit, which makes sense, unless the seller is responsible to extend common elements. So that means if they're buying a condo and there's something wrong with the roof, it's not the seller's obligation to fix that. That is not dependent on your contract, because it's a common element. What the seller is going to have to maintain and fix is what is in their control, which is their unit. Everybody clear on that? We had something come up about that recently. Now they've changed this whole thing. Milestone inspection, structural integrity reserve study, and turnover inspection reports. They've cut all of that and they've changed it to this. The association, and these are the things that they had to add, you see, is required to and has completed a milestone inspection report, and as described in section 553, blah, 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 see paragraph 10D below for avoidable rights, or is not required to have completed as described in section 553, or is required to have completed as described in section, but has not completed. This is critical. You explain what this means to your buyer. The turnover inspection report. The association is required to and has completed a turnover inspection report for a turnover inspection performed on or after July 23rd as described, and see paragraph below for voidable rights, or is not required to have completed a turnover inspection report for turnover inspection. And this option should be selected if the association was turned over prior to January 23rd, or is required to have completed for a turnover report as described and has not completed. So the three things that have been required. You see how important that is? Those are all new. And then structural integrity reserve study. This is about the money. So the other two, one is about, okay, does it have deterioration? Is there a problem? Have they reserved it? Have they studied it? Do they know what needs to be fixed, right? The turnover report. And what is it, do we have the money to fix it? These are the reports, right? Does that make sense? So now the structural integrity reserve report, the association is required to and has completed a structural integrity reserve study based on that same 718, or is not required to have completed a structural integrity reserve study, or is required to have completed it, but has not completed it. Super important, probably to me, the most important one. Do they have the money to fix anything when they need it? Okay, and then this is all new. The association has completed a milestone inspection report, above is checked, or a turnover report, above is checked, or a structural reserve study, above is checked. Now, The buyer hereby acknowledges that the buyer has been provided a current copy of the inspection prepared summary of the milestone inspection report as described in the section above, if applicable, the turnover inspection report and in the most recent structural integrity reserve study. Or this agreement is voidable by the buyer by delivering written notice of the buyer's intention to cancel within 3 days. Again, the 3-day right of inspection, but until they get those reports. See, so one says that got it. Can you see people checking that ahead? Be very careful. This one says they have a right to cancel for 3 days until they receive those. They have 3 days to look at them. This opens up a 3-day right of rescission. And it also says the buyer may extend the time for closing for a period of not more than 3 days, again, with the excluding the holidays and all that. After they receive a current copy of the inspection summary, the milestone report as described, and a copy of the turnover report, and a copy of the association's most recent structural integrity reserve study. So if they request it in writing, just so they can review it.
Am I allowed to say, the team I was on, every single listing we took, we checked that and nobody looked at it.
I'm sure they did.
Very no.
Yeah, there are teams that do that all the time. If there's a lot of people who deal with condos and they pre-check them all the time. And they didn't give it to you. Yeah.
Yeah, or point it out that it was more. Yeah.
Of course they don't point it out because they just want to pass the 3-day right of rescission. Guys, this is so important right here. This is a huge issue, this whole milestone thing. That's why it's a law now, right? Anything that they actually make a Florida statute is a big issue. And they made it a statute because people died. So you cannot skip this and then assume that everything's going to be copacetic. It will not. This will end in a very ugly lawsuit, I can tell you. And I know that you'll get dragged into it. Now, thank God you have good errors and omissions. But please don't drag me into that one. So be hyper diligent about this. Yes.
So if you provided the buyers, if you're on the list side, if you provided the buyers already with the HOA documents, the structural review report, the new reserve report,
Mhm.
you're good to hit that.
Yeah. If they have all of the documents that they have, that's fine. And then they can make their own decision what they care to do. That's what this is about. Providing the information that they need to make an educated decision if they choose to move forward. That's all this is about. But they have to understand what the reports are. You can't give them a bunch of documents and say good luck, right? Like we have to explain what these reports are about, how important they are that they look at them. And then they make their decision, right? Because that's not on us. We can't ever tell people why they should buy things or why they shouldn't buy things. We can give them a professional opinion, a professional advice, right? But it's their choice what they want to buy, how much they want to spend, how much they don't want to spend. That's not ever on us. We don't, sell with our own wallets, right? We share with them with our professional advice, what this means, the importance of these things, but it's up to them to make their decisions. But for example, if it's 29 years old and it's in bad disarray, you can see how badly the building looks. I would suggest highly explaining to them the importance of this report, and they may want to consider that it has not been done yet, and they may want to continue looking. Explaining that in that way, not to say don't buy this, but just explaining that if they have not done this yet, this is something that will be done next year. And this is something that if they find that there is a structural deterioration, if they do not have the reserves, and, you can ask for reserve study, but I guarantee they wouldn't have had one yet. If they do not have the reserves to complete it, then you will probably be facing large assessments to pay for it. Yes, Marima.
Who does these inspection reports? Like, how does that happen?
I'm not an expert at that, but my understanding is there are inspectors that have been certified to do it.
But like it's done, like, for example, if I owned one right now and I wanted to have these reports, I would pay for that myself to get it done. It doesn't go through like the association or anything.
No, it's done through the association. It's done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a whole process. When it comes up 30 years, they have to apply. It's a big thing.
Okay, so
Hey,
you would have
Carrie,
to get the
according
association.
to what we were taught at Florida Realtors about it is that it's a very particular type of architect, not a regular architect
Right.
who
It's a
does those
structural engineer.
reports, and the condo association has to find those special experts.
Yeah, my understanding was it's a structural engineer. There's a group of them and they have to file. I think through the state, they have a whole group of them and they have to file for them. But it's a certain time frame that they have to do it within. Does that make sense, Marima?
Okay, yes. So if the association never did it on their own, the seller wouldn't be doing it because
No,
the association has to do
no.
it.
No, but if
And
the
so if they don't,
association doesn't do it, they're going to be they'll be in violations. There's definitely ramifications if they don't do it within time frame.
so we should always be, if we're on the buyer side, we should always be provided with these inspection reports from the seller.
Yes.
Okay.
If it meets those requirements. And that's why I'm saying, what if it's 29 years old? It's not required to do it yet.
Okay.
That's my point. You know, if it's 35 years old, yes, they should have done it already. But if it's 29 years old, they wouldn't have done it yet.
So the mark is what, 30 years?
30 years, three
Okay.
stories or more, 30
Okay.
years, unless it's within 3 miles from the coastline, and then it's 25 years.
Got it.
Mhm. Okay, so these are the changes here. And you have to be using the new form. So notice that they all say that the dates here have been changed to 12/2024. So you'll see them. They are put in there. I don't know why we have a crisp form. I will change that. Please do not use the crisp form. It does not match our contract. The crisp does not have the calendar days. It's a mask. So please do not use the crisp. You will have a conflict to your contract. Okay. The other change that we have is there's been a new as is contract that has been released. So that one also is now 12/24. There's not been a lot of changes, so don't freak out. So here's some of the things they've added, just a couple different things, nothing big. Under title evidence or other evidence of title, they've changed closing services to title search, not a big deal. Here they've changed some things. Closing services shall have the meaning ascribed that the term each party shall bear their own closing services fees payable to the closing agent. They're trying to clarify what all closing services mean, and they've kind of cleaned up a little bit. So the buyer shall pay premiums for any lender's title policy and endorsements. So that's very clean. They got rid of all the other stuff to make it very clean. And then the other one is if the seller shall designate, then the closing agent, seller shall designate closing agent and pay for owner's policy and charges, and the buyer shall pay for their premiums and the lender's title policy. So it's very clear. And if the buyer wants to do it, then the buyer shall designate the closing agent and pay for owner's policy and charges and premiums for any title policy and endorsements. So it makes it very clear. There was a lot of extra language. We don't care about the Miami-Dade provisions. They cleaned a lot of that up. And then most of this is the same. Under the buyer default, they took away, I thought this was very interesting. So beforehand, remember in our listing agreement, we used to say that if there was a deposit, we could say the broker would retain maybe 50%. That actually used to be the default if we left it blank. And now if you leave it blank, it's 0, right? So if you want to, in our listing, let me go to where that is. So you're like, yeah, let me show you. It's interesting. Well, this is a listing, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Let's go here. So here, this changed actually when we made the changes this last one, but I actually had a conversation with one of you guys about this recently.
I think you just passed it.
Did I? Well, I did because obviously I just kept going. So, oh yeah, here, retained deposits. As consideration for broker services, brokers entitled to receive blank percent of all deposits that seller retains as liquidated damages for buyer's default. This used to say if left blank 50%. But when they changed this, the most recent change, that went away. So now if you want to put something in here, you would have to write 50%, 10%, whatever. If you leave nothing, it's nothing. Now, you guys all know, anybody who's been with me for any length of time, we at Premier never go after the funds. so even if you wrote 50 in there, you left blank and it was 50%, we used to always give it back to the seller because I always felt like that was bad. If there was a default, we'd give the whole deposit to the buyer. Except there was this clause here that used to be under buyer default that said the portion of the deposit, if any, paid to the listing broker upon default by the buyer shall be split equally between the listing broker and the cooperating broker. So I've had on a couple times the other side, the buyer's agent, try to go after that deposit. So on a couple times we had to get a little creative and change it to zero very quickly because I mean that's kind of slim shady for the buyer's agent to go after the liquidated deposit on their own buyer, right? It's like, I don't know, maybe their buyer's a jerk, but so I think it's very interesting though. So they have taken that out. So now if you're representing your buyer is in default, the buyer loses the deposit, you can't go after that deposit. So whether or not the listing agreement has been written in, any percentage there, which you wouldn't know, right? They didn't know before either. Well, now you don't know, but you can't go after it if you're on the buy side because they've taken that out. Isn't that interesting? I thought that was interesting. I think they just keep decoupling and decoupling. That's what I think. Taking away the both. That's what I think they're doing. But anyway, interesting. That's the new change. And I thought it was an interesting one. Just trying to take them both out. Okay. Honestly, there's a lot of red here, but the truth is the only change I saw is that they added FF credit to buyer's broker compensation and GG. So they've just added the FF and GG. I don't know why they did all this red. It looks like everything is all the same actually, guys. So they just kind of moved them around. So I really don't know why they all look red. Yeah, Mark?
Back to what you were previously talking about, are they saying that the seller can't go after that deposit either?
No. The seller would get whatever was left. I mean, unless obviously there's an escrow dispute, right? But per the listing agreement, we used to say that if left blank, we would get 50%. So let's say there was a $10,000 deposit, and if it was left blank previously, that 5,000 would come to us and 5,000 would go to the seller. But I never would do that. I mean, I just never like to do that. So now if you leave it blank, it would all 10,000 would go to the seller anyway.
Okay,
But
I want to make sure I heard that right. Not that like it just
no.
stays in abyss.
It has nothing to do with the seller. It really had to do with what the brokerage was supposed to get.
Okay.
Now, could you put money in there? Yeah, you could. And you could tell the seller, listen, if there is, but see, this is why I didn't do it. I know nobody was saying to the seller, listen, if there is a default, we're going to take half. And that's the other part. Because if you don't explain that to the seller and then suddenly we're taking half, and then you have to say, oh, well, it's not our listing agreement. That seems slim shady to me. It's like, well, it's in the agreement. If you didn't take the time to explain that to them, now it just feels underhanded. I don't really like that. But if you want to do that and you want to put it in there and you want to explain, I have no problem with it because you would get your part of that, right? That's really your money. But you have to then explain it. And that's why I didn't like it to be if left blank, because I don't feel like anybody ever explained it. Does that make sense? Okay, so here, FF and GG, just like I said, was incorporated in. That's the only change there. And really, that's the only changes to the contract. Oh, and they took this out. This contract shall not modify. They took out any MLS or other offer of compensation. Now, it just said this contract shall not modify any offer of compensation made by seller or listing broker to cooperating brokers. So if we have our own broker-buyer agreements, this contract does not modify that. Now, let's talk really briefly about what's the purpose of having FF and GG. It adds the buyer into the equation, right? Because if we do seller's broker to buyer's broker, and we're just going to look at that really briefly. Okay, let's look at this one. Oh God, they have this one first. Jesus Christ. Who has been in this file? It's driving me crazy. Okay, seller's broker to buyer's broker. This is the one, if you checked 10A, right? Everybody with me on that? Everybody know what I'm talking about with 10A? just in case. Let's just look at a listing agreement one more time. Let's just go and do it. Compensation. Now, this is the total compensation if you select 10A or 10B. That means that the seller is offering compensation. If you select 10C, the seller can or not offer compensation. We don't know, but we're not including it here. So then this is only our listing compensation, right? So if they're going to do 3% to us and they don't know what they want to offer, so they're going to select C here, then that's just 3. If they're going to say, well, we want to do 3 to you, 3.5 to you, and maybe 2 to the other side, then it would be 5.5, right? So that's 5.5. And then you do 2 down here, right? So you say 2. But the point here is this number is never going to change, guys. This has come up many, many times. I'm going to talk about this one more time. This number down here can change. This number is negotiable, right? This number is going to be a separate compensation agreement between buyer's broker and the buyer and the buyer's broker and the seller's broker. So if this changes, I would recommend, it's going to be probably in the contract anyway, but I would recommend just getting something in writing between you and your seller saying the seller wants to change that number. Okay? Never convolute the total number because we don't ever want them to think the listing side is negotiable because it's not. It is only negotiable when you're sitting there at the table the first time because they don't have to pay 3.5. They could pay 4. We're okay with that. Right? But the point is, whatever you decide the day of the listing, this doesn't change, right? But this one can change. That's the whole point of it, right? But if you have selected A, that means now you are using seller's broker to buyer's broker, which should be first, not second. Everybody, and actually the other one is going to go at the bottom of the file because we never select B. We don't select B, seller to buyer's broker. We just don't select that one because why are we doing it for them? If we're Premier Sotheby's, we are full service. If they want to do their own, why are they with us? That's not a form. Budge hates that form. I don't really like it myself either. So that's why we don't use that one. But there are other brokerages that do use that one. We don't care. It's not our prerogative. But you see, either form does not include the buyer, does it? This is between seller's broker and buyer's broker. The other one is between seller and buyer's broker. But does any of them say buyer? No. And that is the point of the FF and the GG. So if we look at, please tell me they have them in here. Oh God, she took them out. I'm going to kill somebody. Just, who is in my files? God dang it. Get out of my folders. They screwed up all my folders. And they put another crisp in there. God damn it. People who don't know what they're doing. Okay, here's an FF. This is in relation to the buyer's broker, but it's the buyer asking the seller. You see that? So again, if the buyer goes in and asks the seller, and then you're like, well, we have an agreement because we're 10A, which we don't tell them that, right? We can change the form. Does that make sense? This form, if you don't know if they're offering compensation, you go in on this form, right? That's what this form is about. But this is between buyer and seller. The other form, please tell me it's still in here. Did she take it out? Yes, GG. This form is making it contingent for the buyer to agree with the seller's broker to buyer's broker or seller to buyer's broker. That's all this does. It keeps the buyer engaged in the process. Because if you have the buyer and seller brokers making their own agreements, what if the buyer doesn't agree? Right? What if the buyer doesn't agree? Because I'm still seeing these agents talking back and forth, making their own arrangements. as if there was like before. Who's paying for it? They're not paying for it. The buyer is paying for it. So I think it's really funny that they keep thinking that they can negotiate on their own. They're not the ones paying for it. If they're changing that, that has to come out of the buyer's pocket, right? Because the buyer is still paying the total amount on the buyer broker agreement. Everybody with me? So if the buyer broker agreement says 3 and they keep changing it back and forth between the buyer and the seller's agent, it doesn't change how much the buyer's paying. What if the buyer's like, I don't want to come out of it with my closing costs? What are they going to do? The GG makes it contingent so they can say, no, I don't feel comfortable with what you just negotiated on your own behalf. That's why they created this form, to put the buyer into the negotiation, because they should be. Isn't that sad? It's true. That's why it's there. Yes, Mark. Mark?
Sorry, I'm struggling to unmute. Would there need to be another addendum
Yeah.
along with this? Like
Yeah.
with so the
Use
sellers,
seller's broker to buyer's broker or seller to buyer's broker, depending on which one was. So if we, for example, you put in an offer as a buyer's agent, you put in an FF and they're like, no, use, they'll send you whichever form they want to use, or they'll tell you which form to use, then go back with that form with a GG.
okay,
Now, if you know ahead, okay, the seller's offering this compensation, you know they're offering 2.5, but your buyer wants to ask for 3. Well, go in with seller's broker to buyer's broker and go in on a 3 and incorporate it into the contract. Now, you can also add GG if you want to go ahead and make it contingent. You can add both. You follow me? They both can be added in, because in the contract, you just select GG and add buyer's broker to seller's broker. You follow me?
yes.
Because if they don't agree, maybe they don't want to buy it. Got it?
Very awkwardly quiet, but yes.
I know. Do we have any other questions about that? There's a reason that you don't see seller's broker to buyer's broker, or buyer's broker, seller to buyer's broker added into the contract. Does anybody know why? We're not party to the contract. We're not. It's between the buyer and the seller. Both of these are about the buyer and the seller. And that's the problem. The agents are forgetting they're not part of the agreement, but they keep trying to put themselves in it. And they keep screwing it up, if you ask me. They're making a mess of this. And that's why the DOJ keeps pushing their way in. It's a real problem. If they don't keep stopping screwing things up, the DOJ is going to completely separate this. I can tell you that right now. That's what they're looking to do. So I can only stop a couple people. I can't stop them all. But, I mean, hopefully, if the people would just understand, it's not about us. These deals are about the buyers and the sellers, right? Are we buying the houses, guys? No, right? We're not selling our own houses, right? It's between, we are facilitating. That's why we're transaction brokers. We're facilitating the deal. So we're trying to make, just like when we write an addendum, by the way, oh, Jesus, Lord above, I saw an addendum. Do we write addendums? Do we? No, we don't. And if we add language, if we said, let's say, trying to give you a different, let's say we just wrote home must appraise. What does that mean? Nothing. It means nothing. Okay. You can't write language like that and expect it means something. Seller to give buyer HOA docs by by 24 hours after effective date. What does that mean? Nothing. What if they don't? Doesn't mean anything. You would have to say buyer and seller agree. Seller to give all blah, blah, blah documents to buyer within 24 hours of effective date, or buyer may cancel the contract and receive the deposit back, thereby canceling all. You have to give all this extra fluff. That is why addendas are very long. Because if you don't say what happens if they don't, then it doesn't mean anything. You know, seller to give buyer documents in 24 hours. Okay. And if they don't, it doesn't mean anything. You follow me? This is what I'm saying. I see a lot of these things written into contracts. Oh, Carrie, I wrote it in. You wrote in nothing. I just want you guys very clear on that. Don't start writing stuff in a contract without calling me. Oh, I didn't want to bother you. That's the stuff you need to bother me on, right? Like, please, that you bother me on the marketing stuff. That's really clear. That's the stuff you need to bother me on, because that stuff really doesn't mean anything. And when push comes to shove, you don't have anything. Like extending a contract. Don't extend the contract and don't extend the financing period. Because if you extended the contract and you didn't extend the financing, guess what happens when they don't get the financing? They lose their money. There's a little nuances that you sometimes forget because you're in the middle of the deal. You know, these are the things that you need to make that call on. Those are the calls I love to get. I really do. I mean, you know, sometimes they're bad. I still want them though, because I have to make sure we save our customers, you know, buyers or sellers, whoever they are, because it's those little nuances that matter. They matter. There's so many things. And especially if you want to write something, like, you know me, if it's extra hard to write something, I'm going to call Phil. I'm going to make an attorney do it, because there's certain things I won't write myself. And I'm pretty good at writing stuff, but I won't write certain things that are above my pay grade, because we have to protect all sides of whatever may happen. What happens if it doesn't happen, by when, by, and if, right? There's like, that's why these things are super long. So you just can't, like, even when you're writing in the inspection stuff, I mean, you write in things that are going to be fixed, but if they're not fixed, but by when, and are they checked, and do you get to reinspect? I mean, there's stuff you write in there that it's a miracle some of these things close. So I'm just going to say, please, before you start writing some crazy stuff, especially when we're talking about milestones, condos, definitely check with me on that stuff. I see a great year ahead. I had a wonderful conversation with Mick Knight the other day, and he was so excited about this year. He says he thinks he's already seeing great things happening. He says that this is going to be probably one of the best years we've seen in a really long time. And Mick Knight's been in the industry for about 36 years, I think he said. So that is exciting, guys. So I'm telling you, this is going to be a really strong year. So get your running shoes on. I mean, we got a full price offer on that 8.5 or whatever in Eustis. Guys, that's like a friggin' miracle. Now, we didn't take it. We came back and said no, because we got other things coming in, because we didn't like all the terms, and they're coming back. So this is, I mean, craziness, right? So, and we even got somebody interested in the 14.9 in Ocala, and it's been dead in Ocala. So this has got some good stuff already happening. So imagine, it's going to be a great year. You're going to be running. You're going to be doing a lot of stuff. Don't let these details slip by you. I'm going to tell you, when things get fast and they get great, it's the details that'll kill you. As they say, devil's in the details. So when it's something like this, pick up the phone, give me a text, give me a call. We can't let this kind of stuff get away from us, because the fact that they made a law, when they make a law like the flood disclosure, every home sale, every listing has to have a flood disclosure, must have it, period, end of story. If the seller says, I didn't live there, I don't care. Fill it out. It is a requirement. It is a state law. Seller's disclosure, not a state law. It is required by the state that if you know anything that can negatively affect the value that you disclose in writing, right? And the number one lawsuits that are happening are for disclosure or lack thereof, really. But flood is required by the state. So if you don't have it, that is not going to fly.
That's for your listing.
Listings and for your buyers. Yeah, every sale must have one. Okay, so make sure you have that in every deal. But this one, condominium. So what do we need for condos? We need any contract where you're going to do a residential or as is, right? A condo rider A, right? and we need a seller's disclosure for condominium. Those are the three necessary. And then you need all those documents, right? That we just talked about. Now, what are the requirements for the milestone? 30 years, right? Or more. And 3 stories or taller, right? And if it's how close to the water? 3 miles. And then how old? 25 years. Okay, so we're all good with that. Because sometimes we do sell by the water, Chad. Chad's my water team. So yeah, we just have to think of these things, guys, because this is, I mean, and they just changed those rules for January 1st. There's a reason, right? Things are happening. So we just got to make sure we're very diligent on all that. Any questions? Going to be running this year. We're going to be selling lots of homes. It's going to be a great year. So we got to be ready. Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Going to be great. We've got, I think, 150 listings right now. Maybe more. I got to look. Maybe more. Jane, you're on. Jane, how many do we have? Where's my Jane? Did she hop off? She might have hopped off. I got to look it up. We have a lot of listings, maybe 180. I don't know. But we're going to kill it. It's going to be great. So I will tell you, I'll show you one last thing. I know I'm 5 minutes over, but share. Can you guys see this? My spreadsheet? Can you guys see my spreadsheet online?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I updated this last night for Alex. So I did it, if you remember, to November. Well, I just updated it and I was shocked at how many more homes were sold by the end of the year. This went up to 2740 for Orlando. And Windermere went up to 194. It was only at like 150. That was in 1 month. Yeah, December sold a ton of homes. So that was incredible. And Winter Garden went up to 687. They sold a ton of homes in Winter Garden. So that was incredible. So I have to say, yeah, that up 10.8%. How many homes sold? That's incredible year over year in Winter Garden. Really crazy. So really awesome stuff. So things were already happening at the end of the year, the last month, which is nuts because it's usually slow. So things are already starting to move. Yes, Mark?
Can we take advantage of the agents that make addendums that say home must appraise, or is that not allowed?
What do you mean take advantage?
Like if we were to agree to everything else and then they come
Oh,
back and
even
they're
if
like,
you get that? Yeah, I don't care. Sure, absolutely. It's their fault. They send you something like that. Yeah, don't say anything. Because when they're like, oh, well, we had a home, an appraisal contingency, you can say, I'm sorry, I didn't see one. Where was it? No, absolutely. You just don't be that agent. Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
okay,
Yeah, no, we're not here to teach everybody. Listen, I do my best at the board, but after that, I don't care. If I get that on my contract, I don't want to see you guys write that. But yes, I don't care. If I see from somebody else, just know that when it doesn't appraise, it's their fault. When they don't know that time is calendar days, I keep seeing people think it's business days. That's hysterical. Didn't you just have that? Yeah, their guy thought it was business days for deposit.
Well, it's La Rosas.
Well, La Rosa, yeah. But here's one last thing. You need to understand if the deposit is due, let's say by Monday, it's an as-is contract and they had till Wednesday to cancel. If you didn't put the deposit in because you planned on canceling on Tuesday, your seller or the seller can sue. And they can sue for specific performance too. So they can sue for deposit, they can sue for specific performance. These are things that are happening. I've seen it already recently. So we have one actually that they were supposed to close. They extended the closing. It's about 1.5. It's Susan Abshire's. And they didn't close. They extended it. They were supposed to close all these things. Anyway, long story short, the guy's an attorney. This is what happens. And he's suing for specific performance. So just because you decide you're not going to close and you try to send a release and cancellation, by the way, no, You're in default. You don't get to send a release and cancellation. But if you get anything like that, you have to be very careful of the status that you put it in. We're leaving it pending because we're going after, they're suing for specific performance. We have to be very careful. So anything like that happens, please do not try to change status or do anything. Always contact me. This is very sticky stuff, especially if you have an attorney who wants to sue for specific performance. Mariah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So if it's two-story, but it's 30 years, they don't have one? They don't have
Nope.
a miles?
Nope. Two-story
Okay.
doesn't qualify. You're safe. I mean, I don't know if really you're safe, but you just don't require.
Yeah, yeah.
You may not be safe. I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Do you guys want more training on that? You want me to bring Ness Shakir in to do some training on the condo stuff?
Always. Just bring it on. More training,
Well,
better for them.
Okay, so a couple things I'm gonna just last thing. So we've got some fun things coming for this year. Woo! I know, it's so exciting. We are doing Peacer Boot Camp. What? Super cool. It is going to be two series, two parts. The first part is going to be, I think it's going to be at least 2 hours. It's going to be here. It's going to be action packed. It'll be contracts. It'll be objection handling. It'll be getting around, moving around, lots of fun stuff. That's going to be a lot of fun. Then the second part is going to be in Lake Nona. It's going to be marketing. It's going to be branding. I'm going to have a photographer taking headshots. Going to be super fun. So that is going to be great. So looking forward to that. So look forward to some fun things. We're also going to be doing a Peacer show and tell. So people can bring in their very creative show closing gifts. So that will be fun. That will be up and coming. And we are going to be doing a Peacer Shark Tank. Yes, where we'll be going into groups and we're going to be doing some really unique. I'm going to have some people doing to be my judges, and we're going to be doing some creative listing stuff. So I want to see how we can do some really interesting listing. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So those are good. We also have, as you all know, our kickoff on the 22nd, I believe. Yes. So be there, be square. So some really great stuff coming. Then I'm going to bring Ness Shakir in to do some more training on condos and maybe some hitting a little bit on 1031 like an exchange. So we're also going to be doing another vendor event, right, Miss Jules? Who's suddenly silent? We'll be doing another
Yes,
vendor event.
we will.
Yes.
Yes, we will.
The first quarter. So if anybody wants to have their vendor that they think is wonderful included, please start. We're going to have a sign up list for that. Please start getting me their information. So any other things that you guys are interested in, let me know, but I'm going to start putting all these cool training things out. I'm also in charge of government affairs. I'm the chair for that for Aura. So I'm going to be doing some fun things. I may be including you guys into some cool government affair things, which would be really cool. So look forward to that as well. So have a wonderful rest of your day and look forward to seeing more of you. So have a great, oh, and also Claire will be training again in Lake Nona with marketing and all sorts of some social media every other Thursday. And I will be there as well with the training. So have a great rest of your week and look forward to getting a lot of invites in your calendars. So have a great day. Bye, guys.